And as we share some lessons that perhaps I've learned from Swami Kriyananda and that certainly he learned from his guru. And the topic I'd like to explore this evening is about gratitude, being grateful for the circumstances we're in, for accepting what comes to us. And it was 10 years after Yoganandaji's passing that Swamiji was told to leave his guru's organization. For him, that was a great tragedy. And when Anandamayi Ma heard this news, she wrote to him. And she said the words, "Take this as your guru's grace." And he couldn't do that at the time. He couldn't accept it that way. But eventually he saw that it was a very great blessing that this separation took place. And so it's hard for us to judge circumstances when we're in the middle of them. There is the story that Swamiji would tell that you've likely heard, and I have a feeling perhaps also Yoganandaji would tell this story of the king and his prime minister, and one day they were hunting in the forest and there's an accident and the king loses a finger. And his prime minister had the habit, whenever anything happened that seemed unfortunate, he had the habit of saying, "Everything works out for the best in the end." And when he said that to the king became very angry and said, "How disrespectful and impertinent of you to say that." And he threw the prime minister in prison. And the next time he was out in the forest hunting, he was alone. And he was accosted by a band of headhunters who made human sacrifices to their god. And they were just about to kill the king when they noticed that he was missing a finger. And they said, "Oh, we can't make this sacrifice. We can't make this offering. It's not perfect. He's missing a finger." And so the king's life was spared. And in gratitude, he let the prime minister out of prison, and he admitted that, yes, the prime minister was right, that everything turned out for the best. But then he said, "But it didn't turn out for the best for you in prison. That didn't go so well, did it?" And the prime minister said, "Well, yes, but if I were not in prison, I would be in the forest with you. And look, I have all 10 fingers. They would have sacrificed me." And so everything does turn out for the best in the end. We can have a tendency of wanting to smooth the way for our children, to make things a little easier perhaps than it was for us growing up. But there is also God's plan, and he sometimes has other ideas, and that a difficult childhood is not necessarily a bad childhood. And both Swamiji and I had many difficulties growing up, but everything worked out for the best in the end. Swamiji had a close family, but circumstances kept them apart for much of his childhood. And he was in boarding schools in other countries from the time that he was 9 years old, and first for health reasons, and then because he and his brothers were not able to get a good education in a small town in Romania at the time. And he was 22 when the crucial moment came that he read the autobiography and that he traveled across the country to meet his guru. And at that time, both of his younger brothers were away in other cities and university. His father was in Egypt, and he put his mother on the boat to go to Egypt, and that very day afterwards he found the autobiography, and he was completely alone. He was completely free to do as he wished at that moment. And he said that if his parents were in America with him, that very likely they would have prevented him in some way from making such a radical decision. And he may have missed the connection with his guru in this lifetime. And for myself, I lost my father when I was 7 years old, and suddenly our family had no money, and my mother would work first as a waitress and then as a grocery clerk. And for us 4 children, we knew that that was the end of our carefree childhoods, and that we needed to do everything we could with chores around the house and as soon as we could to earn money to help out. And I think I became rather a slave to duty, perhaps too much so, and became rather serious as a result. And I was the youngest of the 4 of us, and by 4 years, and so it's not like we really played together or had had the same friends. And so for both Swamiji and I, growing up, we felt out of place and not comfortable with the life choices that the people around us had made. And we were searching from a young age. And Swamiji was alone among his peers in this searching. Really no one else he knew had the same sort of questions. And for me it was very different. In the 1960s, it seemed that most of my generation were rebelling against our parents' generation, not accepting the values that they had lived by, and we were looking for alternatives. We were feeling like that the way our parents lived was not creating a peaceful, harmonious, environmentally friendly world, and what could we do to make it better? We were very idealistic in this way. And finally, for me, that search brought me to meditation, and that provided the answer that gave me peace of mind, that gave me confidence, that gave me strength. And the answer was also spiritual family, spiritual community, so that I could feel I was part of a larger Sangha that was helping to uplift the world. And that would not have happened without the leadership of Swamiji, his example, his personal guidance to me as well. And for Swamiji, the answer that he was seeking came in finding his guru and living with his guru. And one by one, the pieces of life's solutions come together, and one sees that more looking back on life, and perhaps I have a few years on some of you in looking back, but these loose ends do tie themselves up. And we must be patient, trust in God, and serve God, and give every question, every unanswered question or prayer that we may have, offer them all up to God, knowing that He will give us the right answer in the right way. And Swamiji and I were both blessed to have a sense of freedom when the moment came that these answers, these inner answers, came to us, that we were indeed free to act on them. That when and where we lived, it was the norm that soon after high school that one would leave home and be responsible for his own life. And my brother and I were perhaps the first family members in our family of any generation to actually go away and attend university. So perhaps our family expectations were already satisfied in doing that. And still, like Swamiji's parents, my mother was very concerned when she learned about the choice I had made, and the question was, would that give me happiness in the end? And let us look a little more deeply into this question. And Swamiji describes in the New Path very colorfully when his family learned of his decision to join the monastery with his guru, Yogananda, what their reaction was. And Swamiji explores the deeper implications of this. And he says very charmingly, "My sudden conversion to this totally unexpected life had the effect on my earthly family of a grenade hurled unexpectedly into one's dining room during a leisurely Sunday breakfast. My parents believe strongly in giving us children the freedom to follow our own lights. But even so, their concern for my happiness made them anything but indifferent to what struck them as a sudden plunge into insanity. Nor did it help matters when, in my zeal of conversion, I endeavored to persuade them that my choice was the only sane one." And Swamiji goes on to describe how not just his parents wrote very strong letters to him, but also his two younger brothers. He was visited by a second cousin who tried to persuade him out of his decision, got a letter from the family priest, and he said in relation to the priest, he said he replied to him, and he said that if the priest really wanted to understand why I had left the church, he might read Autobiography of a Yogi. And so none of this went over very well. And his family was mystified as to why he couldn't choose a more conventional lifestyle. And now Swamiji talks about the players here. Whether by coercion or by love, it is not unusual for people who dedicate their lives to high ideals to encounter opposition from well-meaning friends and relatives. For between selfless idealism and worldliness, there exists a fundamental incompatibility. Worldliness lives in the constant expectation of personal rewards and benefits, of desires satisfied, of value received. Idealism scorns personal benefit, renounces selfish desires, and views life rather in terms of value given. It finds its highest benefit in the very act of giving. Now, sometimes we find people who seem to be totally worldly, or they seem to be totally idealistic, but most of us, most of our family members, most of the people we know are a mixture of the two. And so especially good for us is to see within ourselves these two forces at play. Swamiji goes on to say, the worldly person asks first of life, what do I want? The devotee asks only, what does God want? The mind of the worldly man, Yogananda ji said once, is like a bucket riddled with holes of desires, distractions, and worries. It is impossible for a person in such a state of mind to gather and hold the milk of peace. And so this is our challenge, and what we see also in our lives is we see influences around us, influences that are uplifting, that encourage our natural idealism, that open the heart. And we see influences that pull us down, that make us more small-minded, more selfish, more fearful. And, and our choice is there always. Do we become like the bucket full of holes and the milk drains out? Or do we stay strong? Do we choose the influences that keep us uplifted? Do we choose the Sangha? Do we choose the reminders, the God-reminding activities? And so we're also faced in any given day many influences that want to pull us outward. And we want to avoid those, especially when we're newer to the spiritual path, to make our own dedication stronger, to reinforce the positive, reinforce the uplifting influences, and as much as possible, avoid the others. And some people, of course, we can't avoid completely, but when we're with people who are very selfish or tend to pull us in that direction, think in terms of giving to that person rather than absorbing their vibration. You know, feel strong, feel that God is flowing through you, that God is blessing that person through you. You're seeing the best in that person, their potential, even though what they may be expressing may be anger or selfishness. See their ultimate potential and speak to that. And don't be affected, don't be pulled down, knowing that we have all the tools at our disposal to keep us centered in the spine, centered in our heart center. And just keep reminding ourselves of this inner reality. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, and we look forward to many such evenings together.